but it handles nicer.
Yeah, I get it.
So we better use that stuff.
Okay, I want to bring up one of these examples here. I'm just going to get it up and then we'll rock. I wonder if we've got any examples of soil tests that would be, but okay, well, I won't worry about that. Hamilton spring application 2017. So Hamilton South, Southeast. Where's the one that calls for 16 pounds? Hamilton South, Southeast 1340. Hamilton, Southwest, North. No, that's Meister. Hamilton Yard. So this is the one. Okay, we'll bring this up. Okay, well, I'm here with resident sulfur guru Elston Solberg. And we wanted to discuss a topic today that's been on the radar a little bit in our network. And I think it's a great educational piece and opportunity for us to focus on something to distinguish how one should be determining sulfur level supplies on the biosol program, essentially. And so in the past, in the education that you've done, Elston, out on the road and in the network, you've really focused on tissue tests versus soil tests or other methods of detecting rates of sulfur available in the soil. Can you just tell us a little bit about why you're focused on tissue tests in regards to sulfur over soil tests?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Dan. I think one of the things I've learned over my career, especially when it comes to sulfur, and this applies to all sulfur sources, so I don't care if you're using traditional ammonium sulfate or, on the elemental side, whether it's Keg River or Tiger or now Biosol, I don't care what the source is, but this is some things that we've learned over the years, and actually should be burnt into the brains of not only farmers, but especially agronomists throughout Western Canada. Number one, sulfur is the most variable nutrient across a field. It can vary by up to thousands of percent. Number two, plant available sulfur. Sulfate sulfur is extremely mobile, which means it can move up, it can move down, it can move sideways, which is why it's extremely variable across fields. Number three, elemental sulfur, only a portion of elemental sulfur is made available in any given year. So the stuff that shows up in the soil will only be a small portion of what has been applied, small being 20 to 30% typically. And because plant available sulfur moves up and down and sideways, a 0 to 6 inch sample is not a very good indicator of the amount of sulfur that's available. So if you take all of that into account, the variable nature of sulfur across a landscape, the mobility of the sulfur, and then when you throw the curveball of elemental sulfur into the mix, where annually only a proportion of what's been applied will be showing up as sulfate sulfur, I concluded many moons ago now that soil testing for sulfur deficiency or sufficiency was, in most cases, a waste of time.
You can have elemental sulfur in the soil, but it will not give an indication of that on a soil test.
That's right, because we measure for sulfate sulfur. So my recommendation for years and years and years has been, do not rely on soil tests for determining sulfur deficiency or sufficiency. And instead utilize ratios. So to put that into perspective, if I want to grow a 60 bushel canola crop, which is pretty typical of a lot of high yield canola growers in some parts of Western Canada, that crop's going to require about 198 pounds of N. The N-to-S ratio with canola is 6 to 1, so you take 198 and divide by 6, and that cranks out a total crop requirement of roughly 33 pounds per acre. And so whether that sulfur comes from the soil, from the organic matter, or from the fertilizer and or elemental sulfur that's been applied, that's the number that's necessary for a good crop. And elemental sulfur, especially the biosol program, if we're putting on 154 pounds of sulfur at the 220 pound rate, and we expect 20 to 30% conversion per year, it just becomes simple math, right? And so now on to tissue testing. And because of all of these factors when it comes to soils, I've been highly reliant on tissue sampling throughout the growing season to identify whether or not a crop has sufficient sulfur in it. And again, the people say, well, if the soil is variable, won't the tissue samples be variable? Yes, of course they will. But in the soil, the variability in the soil can be thousands of percent. In the plant, because the plant can only consume so much sulfur, it maxes out. So the range of variability is just because we're utilizing the plant as the collector, is very much narrower and very much more reliable. I hope that makes some sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the soil doesn't buffer things. It just expresses what's there. The plant can only take in so much sulfur. So you remove the top end of the variableness and you concentrate on the range within the plant that's sufficient to support the yield goal that you have. So just by default, you dramatically reduce the total variability that can be expressed with inside the plant. I know that's a little geeky.
I'm glad that I recorded this so I can play this back and put it on loop in my sleep. So
well, here's an example.
Say it another way.
Well, if a plant canola usually maxes out at about 1.8% sulfur. It can't take in any more sulfur than 1.8%. So your range now is 0 to 1.8 instead of 0 to 10,000.
Right.
Right? So the variableness of the method, tissue test versus soil test, is just because of that factor becomes much narrower. And so the reliance on tissues gives me, as an agronomist, a lot more confidence. Now, we throw in another curveball. We've got a few soil samples coming back where guys haven't embodied or embraced this concept. And they say, oh my goodness, my soil sulfur levels are low. But here's what you got to think about. Most of those samples are 0 to 6 inch samples. Sulfur's mobile. So the first question is, what's below? Don't know, because we only took a 0 to 6 inch sample. Number two, if you've used elemental sulfur, particularly Taggart, Keg River, or especially biosol, and put on large amounts, the soil test is only going to measure a small proportion of what you've applied. And it does not take into account what's going to happen during this growing season, because another 20 to 30% for sure is going to be biologically made available. So what's that number? What's 30% of 154? It's a lot of sulfur. So if you're trying to grow a big crop of canola and you're relying on a soil test that's only 0 to 6 inch sample, and you don't know what's below, and you disregard the fact that you're going to get 20 or 30% conversion of whatever it is that you've applied during that growing season, you're missing a big piece of the puzzle. And so once again, tissue sampling at the end of the day is going to give you a much better level of confidence than is a soil test. And I guess at the end of the day, if all of this, what I've just said, is not taken into account, and you've got a recommendation of 6 or 7 pounds for a 60 bushel crop, and you want to sleep a lot better at night, I suppose you could spend another $2 or $3 and put that 6 or 7 pounds down as ammonium sulfate, but I don't think you need it. However, if it makes you sleep better at night, 6 or 7 pounds out of 33 or 34 total requirement is not very much. Conversely, 6 or 7 pounds of 154 pounds applied is about 5% of what's applied. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Now, if I'm a busy producer and I don't fully understand all the higher level sophisticated agronomy that you're talking about, all I know is that my soil tests, which I've trusted for years to make fertility decisions on, is saying I need some sulfur. But my biosol rep is saying, no, you don't. Like, we should have plenty of release. If I decide to trust biosol, if I decide to trust my biosol rep,
yeah.
what should I be doing proactively in terms of monitoring the crop for signs of deficiency, and how would I treat any deficiency if it did show up, if I'm ready to let go of the vine and trust biosol, but I need a backup plan?
Beautiful
question.
Beautiful, yeah. Beautiful question. So the simplest way to do that, I guess, is to tissue test at a bottle elongation. So if you're not convinced that there's going to be enough sulfur in the system from biosol, despite all of the stuff that we've just talked about, and the assurances from the folks providing the biosol, and realizing they're backed by a whole bunch of agronomists and semi-intelligent individuals, possibly including myself. So you go out and you take some tissue samples. Well, first of all, you look at your fields, and if you see weird patches and good patches, you take some tissues from those two different areas and you fire them off and get them analyzed, the tissue analyzed, because now you still have time to fix the issue if there is an issue, which is doubtful. So elongation, grab some tissue samples from the top 3 or 4 inches of the crop, because that's where sulfur is going to express itself, remembering that sulfur cannot be cannibalized in a plant. So when a plant becomes deficient, it will always be in the new tissue. So you sample the top 3 or 4 inches, the newest tissue, fire it off to the lab. Lab's results come back, oh my God, I'm short in sulfur. You can go in and get some sulfur on and fix the problem literally overnight. Chances of that happening with the biosol or any of the other heavy application programs is very, very unlikely.
What are you looking for as a field scout if you're looking for sulfur deficiencies in your crops?
You're looking for new tissue. Well, here's a couple things. By the time you see visual symptoms, the plant's probably been under stress for 2, 3, 4 weeks. So I really do not like to utilize visual symptoms. But if you're going to have visual symptoms, the newest tissue will look like a nitrogen deficiency. It will be less intensely green. If it's severe, it will be less intensely green and purple. There may be cupping of the leaves. If the plant's already bloomed, the blooms will be smaller, less intensely yellow. The plants will be slightly taller, a little bit more spindly. But if you've got those situations, you've had some severe sulfur deficiencies on that field for a long time. My inclination always is to get out there and take tissues and let the analytics tell you the story. Because visual symptoms, by the time you see a visual symptom, that plant has been suffering for a long time.
Right.
It's like a human that's, got whatever disease, and they don't go to the doctor until it's almost, tragic. So, and that's the beauty of tissue sampling, is you take a tissue sample, it tells you a lot about what that crop's experiencing this year, but the beauty of that tissue, and the reason I've converted a lot of my analytical dollars with the few guys that I'm working with to tissue sampling, is that it forecasts the future. So if you do have a tissue sample that comes back, sulfur's good, oh, but look at the boron, it sucks. What does that tell you about the future? Oh, look at the copper, it sucks too. What does that tell you about the future? And if we're using canola as the example today, sulfur might be good, but if your boron's low, now what? Well, same thing. You can get into the field and fix that boron deficiency very quickly through a multitude of ways, because boron is also soil mobile. What about copper? Well, canola actually doesn't give a shit about copper, but next year's wheat crop really does. So the tissue sample tells you about what that crop is experiencing today, and it foreshadows the future. And it actually also tells you quite a bit about the past, but that's why I really, really encourage the use of tissue sampling when it comes to identifying sulfur deficiency or sulfur sufficiency in crops, especially in the programs that we're utilizing.
Well, and the beauty is that you will come out this summer to wherever any farmer is in Western Canada and physically do their tissue testing for them. Is that fair to say, Elston? You're down with that? You'd be
As much as humanly possible, absolutely.
You're such a gracious gentleman. So I just want to sum up some of the key points here, as though I was talking to myself as a 5-year-old, which I think is often a very functional way of communicating with myself, as with my childhood self. So point number 1, don't necessarily expect on a biosol program that your soil tests or your PRS crop cast or whatever method you're using outside of tissue testing will absolutely 100% always show you that you don't ever need any sulfur on the biosol program. You may see some of these indicators calling for sulfur at times. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and actually, absolutely, that's fairly well summarized. There's another piece to that, though, is that usually the issue with soil tests is not that you get a false minimum. Most times you get a false maximum. So I'm using the wrong terminology, but the biggest risk with soil testing is not getting a low number, it's getting a high number that makes you feel confident in that you don't need anything. And but for the purposes of our conversation today, you nailed it down. If you've got a low test and you're on a biosol program or any of the other ones, it really doesn't mean anything because you got a whole shit whack of sulfur ready to be converted during the growing season.
Awesome. And the second point would be the ideal barometer for our success in our sulfur program with biosol would be a tissue test at elongation, which would show that the plant has maximum sulfur and that your N to S ratios, for example, are ideal.
And that timing, exactly, Dan, and that timing is good because now if something's out of whack, whether it's sulfur or maybe it's nitrogen or maybe it's boron, right? 3 soil mobile nutrients, you can get in there with lots of time to spare and fix the crop up. So it has more value than just that. And then again, I said earlier, it also foreshadows the future. So that's why it is so valuable. So elongation, early bloom is the absolute end of the window, which then the reason for that is it gives us time to respond if we do have something that's going on in that crop today.
So that should be the indication of any issue with your sulfur program. That's where you should be looking for the low watermark on your sulfur program.
Bingo.
Okay.
Bingo bobangi.
But we also have another low watermark, which we never like to see, but we know something's wrong with the program. At that point, alarm bells are going off if we see physical signs of sulfur deficiency in the field, which means the plants are in stress. But we still have an opportunity to address the sulfur issue at that point without loss of yield, or is that we're cutting it too close?
No, at that stage, I mean, assuming that it's not a screamingly, stage 4 cancer thing, yeah, you can recover the bulk of the yield, if not all of the yield at that growth stage.
So our main points here are: don't expect on an elemental sulfur program that we would set your expectations that your soil tests or your PRS cropcaster would never show you that you need sulfur. You would never, don't expect that your soil tests will never call for sulfur. They may. If they do, it's not the end of the world. We're not off program. Check your tissues at early bloom elongation. that's your bellwether if you have an issue. And the last line of defense, of course, is seeing physical symptoms of deficiency, which we should never see. Um, but I think it's important for us to understand where to set expectations, for the producers to understand where they're concerned or not concerned, and what metrics they should be using for success in their sulfur program, and then what opportunities they would have to course correct if there is any issue. Because the bottom line is it's just a fertilizer. There's tons of variability, and we talk about 920,000 acres now of biosol in Saskatchewan, Manitoba. It's going to be working from years 1 to 5. That's a lot of different ground and different circumstances, a lot of different crops. But we just want to make it clear where to set people's expectations about this 5-year program.
Yeah, I mean, it's a new concept. I mean, yeah, 1 million acres in Manitoba and Saskatchewan is a big number, but there's a lot of people out there that are still unsure about the program for lots of reasons that we don't need to get into here. But you know, for me, from a logistical, economic, sustainable, all those things, it's an absolute no-brainer approach to making life as a farmer simpler. And you just got to trust. You got to trust the product. You got to trust your advice, and the proof will be in the pudding. One thing we didn't talk about that I'm like really impressed with is the PRS Cropcaster stuff.
Right.
Some of the results that we're getting from you know, from that system, given that it integrates not only what's going on in the soil, but it integrates soil water, and it integrates yield potential based on soil water and nutrient balance. And not only that, it integrates cost of production and forecasts net profit. You know, pretty powerful tool. Not a trouble, but one of the concerns with this system is that sort of the way my brain works is that the system mimics root systems. And if you have a 0 to 6 inch sample and you've put on a large amount of elemental sulfur as biosol, this system will not anticipate the release of the elemental sulfur to sulfate for this upcoming crop. So I don't know what example you have here, but what's the recommendation? Is we're recommending 16 pounds of sulfur using the N to S ratio for this yield goal. It's just over 60. So call it 200. 200 divided by 6 to 1 to N to S ratio is 34 pounds roughly to support this crop. So at 16 pounds, what's 16 pounds of 154, Dan? I'll do that quick here.
It's just over 10%.
Yeah, there you go. So we're expecting 20 to 30 easy. So if we call it 25 of 154, we've got way more than enough sulfur coming out of the biosol during the growing season to take care of the supposed shortfall that this soil test is showing, plus some additional. And again, sulfur that's made available is in the sulfate form, which is one of the 4 nutrients that are soil mobile. So the 0 to 6 inch sample is one piece of the puzzle. What's going on in the 6 to 12, 12 to 24 inch depths? You know, that's, if you really want to see that picture, then we should be looking down there too. But overall, I love this system. It's because of it's so integrative. It integrates soil, precipitation, it integrates nutrients, it integrates costs. There's a lot of really good info here.
I really love it too. And I think this is a great illustration of what we're talking about here. If we got a requirement or calling for 16 pounds of sulfur on a PRS crop cast, or conversely with the soil test, really, if we think about it, we've already deposited 10 times that amount to be drawn out with good growing conditions in the biosol program. So really all we need this year to cover off this, to reach a 53 bushel or 60 bushel max yield target, is 10% release from the amount of product that we put down. So there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to expect that elemental sulfur, given that there's the growing conditions. I mean, you know better than anybody else on planet Earth, except maybe the good Lord above, that water drives potential. So if we get the water potential for 60 bushels, the maximum call for sulfur here, the maximum call for sulfur is 60 pounds, which is completely within reason that the biosol application from 2 or 3 years ago is going to apply that and more.
Exactly. Exactly, and that's the magic of the elemental sulfur programs that have been used effectively around the planet for, decades. I mean, elemental sulfur is one of the very first fertilizers that humanity used. So it's you just nailed it with what you just said. So
humans are so smart. It's just amazing.
What can I say?
We know we could take byproduct of a volcano and put it on ourselves. So
people harvesting that sulfur from volcanoes all over the planet right now as we speak. Hell of a nice job.
Poor bastards.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, you know when we got it good, when we don't have to find it out of a volcano. Seen that on National Geographic. Not a pleasant. That's like what's that show on Discovery? Planet Earth's Worst Jobs.
That could be. I don't watch much television anymore.
Yeah.
Trump's my main source of entertainment these days.
Oh, you must be highly enlightened. So you're familiar then that Russia's just a snow job. It wasn't. There's no collusion.
Sure? Are you sure? Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, that's beyond the scope of the conversation today. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that's helpful.
Well,
Yeah.
I guess for me, if I was going to summarize this down so my grandma could understand it, even
Yes.
though she's not with us anymore, it would be, Grandma, don't stress if your soil test comes back low after you've put on 220 pounds of elemental sulfur in the biosol form, because it's going to convert, and biologically at about the same rate as your crop growth is, and everything's cool. And that's what it all boils down to.
Let me see. Can I sum this up? Grandma, don't let your soil test get you down. Sounds like a country song, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay. I think we get the idea now. Oh, I love it when people call me 2 times in a row. We'll call you back. We'll call you back, I promise. Okay. That's really good. Thanks, Elston, for coming on and enlightening us as usual. And hopefully that helps everybody who's trying to discern whether their sulfur program is being effective or not. And if you have any further questions, how do people get a hold of you, Elston?
So my email address is sunmountaininc@gmail.com. Or you can text me at 780-991.
Yeah.
What is my phone?
Say that one more time. You know, a little bit. We broke up a little bit. Say that one more time. 780.
991. Can't remember my phone number. What's my phone number?
780. Yeah, I was like, I think you broke up there. I think there's more numbers than that. Oh, I have to admit, I feel slightly better about myself. Now that you can't remember your phone number, because this kind of thing I forget all the time.
I don't ever phone myself, actually.
You should call yourself. You're a very interesting individual. 780-995-5691.
995-5691. So let's try that again. they can get a hold of me at sunmountaininc@gmail.com. So sun in the sky, mountain to the west, INC for incorporated at gmail.com, or text me
Yeah.
at 780-995-5691, 995-5691.
Does that help?
Beautiful. Thank you. And I'll
Well,
do my best
it
to
shows
get
up
back.
backwards for me, but I think it shows up the right way for the audience. So
Yeah. So you see in the back, we got earth, dirt, soil, and then we got that owl.
yeah.
Well, that's my spirit animal, right? I bought that last night at some kind of a fishing charity thing. I came home with a lot of stuff. Spent way too much money, but that's one thing that I came up with last night. It's supposed to indicate that there's some wisdom in this room. I'm not sure if it's true, but it's supposed to indicate there's some wisdom.
You should scan that, and we'll Photoshop your head onto it.
Oh God,
That would be perfect.
that would be
You could use that in all of your bio photos for your speaking engagements going forward,
that would be hilarious.
with the English smoking jacket on there.
Yeah. No, my Norwegian jacket. Yeah.
Listen, man, I love you a lot. Thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Everything you've done to help us out and enlighten us. And yeah, we'll see you. We'll be seeing you around the circuit. Hopefully that helps everybody. Thanks, Elston, for coming on here.
Stand out anytime, buddy.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording here, but we won't stop the meeting.